Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Ben Boulous and Sarah Campbell.
Our headlines at 6 o'clock. Iran carries out a major attack on Israel. More than 300 drones and missiles were launched, but most were shot down and little damage has been caused.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu chaired a war cabinet as world leaders condemned the attack.
Here, the Israeli Defense Minister says the confrontation with Iran isn't over amid fears Israel could launch a response to this unprecedented attack.
Tributes are paid to one of the victims of the Sydney shopping centre attack. Ashley Good died trying to protect her baby daughter.
It shook everybody up. Every second person you bump into is either crying or has a tear in their eye.
Good morning. In sport and Irish, 1, 2, 3, 4 at Aintree, where I Am Maximus storms clear to win the Grand National for jockey Paul Townend and trainer Willie Mullins.
And good morning. It's going to be a cooler day today compared to yesterday, especially in the southeast of England. But for many of us, it's a case of sunny spells and showers. I'll have all the details very shortly.
Good morning to you. It is Sunday, the 14th of April. Iran has carried out a major attack on Israel overnight, with the Israelis saying hundreds of drones and missiles were launched.
There are no reports of major damage or injuries because most of the weapons were intercepted by the Israeli defence system or shot down by fighter jets from Israel as well as its allies, including the United States. Extra RAF jets were also deployed in the region.
Iranian officials said the attack is now complete and was in retaliation for an airstrike widely believed to be from Israel, which killed 7 of its military leaders on April the 1st. Our reporter Vincent McAviney has the latest details.
In the early hours of Sunday morning, sirens ring out over Jerusalem. Pierced by the sound of loud explosions, the night sky was lit up with air defense systems shooting down objects over the city. Israel may be used to having to defend its airspace from crude rockets, but this was a new threat. After months of rising tensions in Gaza and in response to a strike on its consulate in Syria earlier this month, Iran has targeted Israel directly from Iranian soil for the first time. More than 200 drones, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles were launched by Iran. Israel was aided in its defense by the US military, which shot down several drones, whilst British RAF jets flew over Iraqi and Syrian airspace with authorization to intercept any airborne attacks. An Israeli spokesperson insisted the joint defensive operation had been successful in thwarting the attack.
This is a severe and dangerous escalation. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are at the highest level of readiness, ahead of this large-scale attack from Iran. Together with our partners, the Israel Defense Forces is operating at full force to defend the state of Israel and the people of Israel. This is a mission that we are determined and ready to fulfill.
President Biden spoke directly to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu overnight. He'd had to rush back to the White House to meet with his national security advisors in the Situation Room. On Twitter, he reiterated his message that America's commitment to Israel's security against threats from Iran and its proxies is ironclad. Despite the largely successful defensive operation, there were still celebrations on the streets of the Iranian capital, Tehran, for the attempt. But it's drawn international condemnation, with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak saying, "I condemn in the strongest terms the Iranian regime's reckless attack against Israel. The UK will continue to stand up for Israel's security. No one wants to see more bloodshed." For decades, Israel and Iran have fought shadow wars. But this weekend, a new, uncharted chapter has begun, fraught with risk and unpredictability as these two sworn enemies face off directly for the first time. Vincent McAviney, BBC News.
Well, let's show you the scene now across Israel. This is the view of Jerusalem, and we've been hearing from our correspondents there that the first signs that an attack was imminent came during the evening when the Israeli army announced its forces were on full alert and dozens of warplanes were seen in the air. Across the rooftops of Jerusalem, one of our correspondents describes, we heard sirens, and goes on to say that explosions then lit up the night as the Iron Dome air defence missiles soared into the sky. A very different picture this morning, with calm now across the rooftops of Jerusalem. Stark contrast to the scenes and the sounds that people there will have heard and seen last night.
We're joined now by our Middle East correspondent, Hugo Basher, who is in Jerusalem. Good morning to you, Hugh. Just take us through what must have been an incredibly tense night for anyone who was in Israel and hearing those sirens going off.
Yeah, Sarah, good morning. So it is after 8 o'clock in the morning here, so the country is waking up after a very long and tense night of attacks, an unprecedented attack by Iran. For the first time ever, Iran attacking the Israeli state. And we heard the air raid alerts here in Jerusalem at around 2 o'clock in the morning. We could hear the explosions of, air defense intercepting, objects that had been fired by the Iranians, and we could see, the explosions in the sky. So a very tense night here, but it didn't really come as a surprise because for days American officials have been warning that this Iranian attack was a matter of when, not if. And last night we had some indications from the Israeli authorities that an attack was imminent. Now, we had an update in the last hour from the Israeli authorities. They said 300 drones and missiles, more than 300 drones and missiles were fired by the Iranians, and that 99% were intercepted. And obviously the Americans helped the Israelis in this effort, a very successful defense by the Israelis. Some missiles did penetrate the Israeli territory, and a military base was hit, but given the scale of this attack, a very limited impact after these attacks by the Iranians.
Yeah, as you say, Hugo, no major damage. Do we have any sense as to where the targets were?
Yeah, so it does seem that the Iranians were trying to hit military targets here in Israel. But again, most of those objects that were fired by Iran were drones that were intercepted before they even reached Israeli territory. And again, the Israeli authorities praising the level of coordination that they had, especially with the Americans. We had a top American general here in the country discussing with senior Israeli officials the threat coming from Iran and also the possible Israeli response. So we should get a better picture of the damage, of the impact that this attack had throughout the day. But I think the key question today here is about the possible Israeli response, because Israeli officials have been warning that they were going to retaliate to any kind of attack from Iran. And it is very interesting that President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu overnight, and according to some reports, he told the Prime Minister that the US is against the idea of an Israeli retaliation.
OK, Hugo, for the moment, we'll be talking to you throughout the programme, but for the moment, thank you, correspondent Hugo Basher in Jerusalem.
We're joined now by our reporter Will Vernon, who's in Washington. Will, President Biden's spoken to the Israeli leader, Benjamin Netanyahu. Do we know what's been said during that conversation?
That's right. There was a statement released after that call. In that, President Biden condemned in the strongest possible terms what he called this brazen attack by Iran. He said US aircraft and missile defense destroyers, they were sent to the region beforehand. They helped Israel repel this assault, and he adds the Israelis shot down almost all the missiles and drones launched at it. And Mr. Biden earlier cut short a weekend away in Delaware to rush back to the White House and hold urgent meetings with his national security team. And there was a bit of a kind of tornado of communication between America and Israel over the last 24 hours or so. There were phone calls between Mr. Biden and Mr. Netanyahu, the defense ministers, a few of those, national security officials too. There was clearly very close coordination, communication as that attack from Iran was unfolding, symbolizing, I think, the really close relationship between America and its ally. And also, no US forces or facilities were hit in that assault, according to Mr. Biden. And I think that's a good result for the president, because that means America is less likely to be dragged into some sort of direct military confrontation with Iran.
And I suppose, as you say, there will be some relief in the US that neither any direct attack on any American bases or interests in the region, nor were there any fatalities among any Israelis, which, having said that Israel would have the US's ironclad support, could really have risked dragging the US into a much bigger and more complicated conflict that it really doesn't want to get involved in.
Well, that's the big risk, isn't it? And ironclad support, that's a phrase we've heard time and time and again. President Biden and other officials saying that repeatedly in recent days, that American support for Israeli security is ironclad. But you're right in that the next big question, of course, is what happens next. In that statement from President Biden, he said he'd be convening G7 leaders on Sunday to coordinate a united diplomatic response. But this was an unprecedented large-scale attack on America's most important ally in the Middle East. So Israel will obviously be looking to respond now, and I think pressure will grow on the Biden administration about what exactly to do about that, whether they need to rein in the Israelis, what sort of support to offer them. And we also, of course, don't yet have a complete picture of the extent of this attack, the damage, the casualties, the weapons used. But whatever conclusion is reached, I think America, Israel, other allies, they will be urged to proceed with caution to ensure that they don't get dragged into a regional war, a wider conflict.
OK, well, for the moment, thank you very much. Will Vernon, our reporter there in Washington.
Now, politicians here have given their reaction on social media. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps said the UK is working with Israel to prevent further escalation. He said the attack served no benefit other than undermining regional security. Writing on X, Mr. Shapps urged Iran to end all forms of destabilising behaviour.
Meanwhile, the leader of the opposition, Sir Keir Starmer, also took to social media to condemn what he called unacceptable attacks. He said he was supporting measures to restore calm in order to prevent a wider regional war.
Now then, it is 13 minutes past 6. You are watching BBC Breakfast. And of course, there has been another major story that's broken in the last 24 hours. Police in Australia have